Welcome to Talent Freaks with Andy Coon. I'm Andy, a filmmaker and photographer based in the Bay Area of California. This podcast delves into the journeys of creative individuals who inspire curiosity and impact through their work. In this episode, we're revisiting a conversation from 2006 with Brian Conley, a filmmaker and media activist dedicated to empowering communities through participatory media. Before we dive in, don't forget to subscribe and rate Talent Freaks on your favorite podcast platform. It helps others discover these inspiring stories, and it makes me very grateful for you to do that, so thank you. Now, let's jump back to 2006 and let the younger version of myself introduce you to Brian Conley. In this conversation, I called Brian Conley, who is the founder and director of aliveinbaghdad.org. He's the one that created it, came up with the concept, the idea, and is actually making it happen. The great thing about aliveinbaghdad.org is not saying it 5 times, that's for damn sure, but is the concept that is behind it. What he did was he went over to Baghdad, set up shop, and he started a video blog about the citizens in Iraq. And he recruited some citizens who were interested in being a part of this project. They go out and they interview people about their daily lives, how they're living in Baghdad, dealing with the war, dealing with occupation, dealing with the civil war, about everything, with their electricity problems, that they still don't have electricity that is 100% through the cities, to the wounds that they suffer through the bombings and from other incidents. And also the cemeteries are being overfilled, and they're just new cemeteries. There's a lot of death going on over there, and these people are dealing with it day in and day out. And it's a way for us to see and understand what is actually taking place in Iraq with Iraq citizens. They're starting another site called aliveinmexico.org. And this is where the conversation picks up, because I start talking to Brian about his friend Brad Will. Brad traveled much of South America in his 36 years and was dedicated to publicizing people's struggles in the global South. Brad was also an independent journalist and a strong voice for independent media. And Brad was killed in Guadalajara City, Mexico. First of all, how did your friend, who was killed down there, how did that start off?
Well, I mean, there's been a conflict there for a long time, and basically, it seems like from looking at his video and from all the stories and the different accounts, it seems like things got out of hand. Like some guys showed up with guns from sort of the opposition, and maybe, they didn't know what they were doing. Maybe they were there just to scare people. Maybe they were there to shoot somebody. I mean, nobody really knows, you know what I mean? Mm-hmm. It certainly seems like it got slightly out of hand on both ends, on both sides, you know what I mean? So, only time will tell, if even that will tell what exactly happened. But, he was shot. Some people are claiming that he was shot once and then was shot again by, his so-called friends on the way to the hospital. I think that seems really absurd.
Yeah, I think you could dismiss that.
But that was well put out, and there are photos of the people who had guns, who were shooting off guns there that day. I mean, there's photos online of them.
I saw
that.
They've
all been identified, and they were arrested, and then they were just recently let go. And basically, the state said, well, we don't have a case.
And weren't they with the police?
Yeah, the guys who shot, yeah, exactly.
Unbelievable.
Yeah.
Now, how did you guys get started up in Mexico? I mean, when you heard about this ongoing to struggle down there?
Well, I mean, basically, we had heard about the conflict there before my buddy Brad was killed, and I started thinking about going down. And the main reason is because my partner, Eowyn, is pretty much fluent in Spanish, and she wanted to go down. And then I have a buddy, Jeff, he's a photographer, but he's got a little bit of skill in video, and he had 2 weeks of vacation or whatever, and had the money to just sort of put it on his credit card or on his bank account to go down. So he and I, bought some equipment and decided that, that he'd go down for the amount of time he could go, which was 2 weeks or a little more. And I went down for about exactly a month, just to and it was sort of an experiment, to see could we start, Alive in Baghdad, could we use the same model in Mexico? Would it work out? I mean, that remains to be seen. We've got 4 or 5 videos posted right now.
Right.
think 4 on Mexico. But I've got 40 some tapes from the month, so
Wow.
there's gonna be definitely more stuff coming out. We hired 2 correspondents down there. These folks, Armando and Yasmin, that we met, and they're planning to work for us for the next, till April, just to see how it goes. And then in April, hopefully, I'll go back, or somebody else from the organization will go back and work on, the next while. They're going to be in the southern part of the country, southern region, and then starting in April, we'll start, covering the northern part of Mexico as well.
Now, let's start from the beginning. I jumped right into it because I was so intrigued. But how did you guys get started with Alive in Baghdad? From the concept, how did you start that out?
Well, I mean, when it started, it was basically just me, and I sort of decided, I've wanted to go to Iraq for a long time, and when I was in college, I took a year of Arabic with an Iraqi professor, and I remember exactly where I was when we heard in 1998 that that we were bombing Iraq again, and stuff like that. And why do I remember that? I have no idea. But I could take you today to the place exactly where I was standing when I heard about it, and show you exactly where my friend was standing when he told me. And so Iraq's always had kind of an impact. Like I remember the watching the Gulf War on TV and stuff like that. And so in 2002, I'd started thinking about trying to go to Iraq to talk about Alive Voices in the Wilderness, and also about the sanctions program in Iraq, and talk and sort of cover the issue of the sanctions and how that was affecting Iraq. And then of course the war machine got going, and then we ended up going to war in Iraq. And I'd always sort of thought about going, but it always really seemed crazy. And then in 2004, during the spring and summer of 2004, I met a bunch of guys of independent filmmakers and activists and people who had been to Iraq. And, for whatever reason, got it through my head that, oh, hey, it wouldn't be that hard to go to Iraq. I could do that. And so the original plan was just to go and to do whatever I could do, basically to shoot as many interviews as I could, and, just get as many stories as I could from Iraqis about what life in Iraq was like, and just, see what happened. Because I didn't have any way of knowing if I'd ever go back, if it'd ever get anywhere, what would happen. And then, while I was there, Omar, who I was working with first as sort of like my fixer, translator, whatever you want to say, he started saying, hey, we should start like our own news agency, our own TV agency, and it'd be great, and I was kind of like, well, that would be cool, but it'll never be possible because nobody really wants to support this kind of work, and the money's not there and all that. And, the money's still not really here, but,
Right.
This summer, we got a couple of grants, and I was able to buy some equipment and get enough money to pay salaries until right now, to our guys in Iraq, and we've started making it happen. We're producing for 4 months now, or 5 months. We've been producing a regular weekly show about Iraq.
I got to tell you, I mean, what you are doing with Alive in Baghdad, you are basically a pioneer in this kind of media, because this is just so, well, first of all, you're in a war zone, and you're also telling stories that our regular media is not saying. But also you're going above and beyond that, because there are all these documentaries coming out that will show the war, the horrors on both sides. But then after you watch a documentary, it's over. But you're doing this, and it's a continuation. It's really what the news should be doing. So hats off to you, man.
That was a fundamental reason why I decided to go to Iraq. Because family and friends, when I was thinking about it, they were like, "Why do you?" I'm like, okay, I understand. Like, we need better coverage on Iraq. We need to know what's going on. But why do you have to go? Aren't there other people going? Aren't there other people? And I said, well, look, there are other people going. But I had met some of these folks, and like one of the guys that I met in 2004, just this summer or in late summer, he released his film that he was working on since 2003, 2004.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, well, look, people are going, but they're going to sort of shoot their film or make their documentary or, use the war in Iraq to sort of, yes, to do some good, but really more to like get their big break, and produce their masterpiece or their artwork. And for me, it was like, well, I want to know every day that I did something to try to help, the tide change, and maybe to get people to better understand what's going on in Iraq, and maybe this war won't last as long as it, a little bit less long than it would have without our work.
Now, I've been watching a few of the episodes, and it seems like you have mostly all the translators going out and doing interviews, or do you have the cameraman, your guys going out with the interpreters, and basically they're asking the questions, or
Well,
is it
no,
Iraqis doing it?
I mean, it's all Iraqis.
Mm-hmm.
Everything's done by Iraqis now. I mean, if you look at some of the older stuff, and if you can sort of tell if there's like a little bit of a difference in the production quality, some of the older stuff,
Mm-hmm.
like from June and before. I mean, that was I shot some of that, and I have a refill light that I use and a 3-chip TRV 900. But other than that, I mean, pretty much since I can look here since the end of July. Everything's been shot by Iraqis. There's been a couple of things where we had to fill space because we didn't have a translation, like maybe 3 interviews where we had to fill space, where we used something that I had shot, or 4 places where we used something I had shot, previously that we never used, or some segment of it that we sort of revamped. Just because our hardest problem has been translation, But really, it's Iraqis. Like, we've got one guy, Assam, who he worked as a translator and then fixer right after the war started, and then he was able to get like 3 months of training in video production in Scotland at some point.
Mm-hmm.
I think probably in 2004, early 2005. And so he's got a little bit of training, and then we've got Omar, who's a young guy who is really very like hip and technically savvy and interested in video games and things like that. And I think in the same way that many young people in the U.S. already have a little bit of proficiency with media and things of that nature. It was the same thing for him. And I also gave him some lessons, and I've given him pointers as we've gone on about his composition and how to frame things better and things like that. I mean, and maybe you and I have a little bit of disagreement on this, or other people might have a disagreement with me about this, but I don't think that the fundamentals of production are all that hard. I think that there's really a formula. If you want to be a great filmmaker or somebody who's doing like just amazing cinematography, yeah, there's an art to that. There's some level of inspiration. But if we're talking about, making a properly composed shot, shooting it for long enough, having your audio levels good,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's a formula.
Yeah. Yeah, you're absolutely right about that.
And for me, like, we felt like we just needed to, I felt like we just need to find the people who have the stories. Like, I've been involved with indie media, since 2000, and I really kind of broke with indie media after probably 2003, 2004, because I just felt like we weren't getting anything done. Like they were great for covering large summits and demonstrations and things like that in the United States, but nobody was making films about what the free trade area of the Americas meant for the U.S. or the world when there wasn't a protest about it.
Right.
And stuff like that. And I feel like, right now, I mean, it's great to sort of like use your privilege to go, and your access to equipment and your knowledge to go and make documentaries and films about things that people aren't talking about. But I'd rather be using all of those tools and that access to give it the equipment to the people who have the stories to tell themselves.
I agree 100%. And it's, I come from a documentary background, and I've been immersed in the web for the past 6 months. And the more I start exploring and uncovering all these, the media, how we're doing everything now, it's clear to me now that it would be better. I would do the same thing that you were doing. So it's, I mean, you were, when I called you a pioneer earlier, I was really meaning because you're really inspiring some of the things that I want to do further down the road. So hats off to you, man, and your crew. So how many people are over there right now, like Americans and Iraqis working with Alive in Baghdad?
Well, I mean, there's no Americans in Iraq right now. I'm the only one, who's been in Iraq, who's not Iraqi at this point, who's worked with the project. I spent about a month in Iraq in October of 2005 and to November, and then I was supposed to go back this summer, but I had about 2 months over there, over in the Middle East, and by the time I had worked everything out, I got the visa, we got a place to stay, we figured out how we were going to make everything happen. I was going to have maybe 2 weeks in Iraq, and it was going to cost $2,000 or something. So I mean that pays 2 of our correspondents for 2 months.
Mm-hmm.
So we just said, well, I'm not going to go to Iraq right now, and I'll try to come back maybe in the winter or January. And I actually thought I was going to be back in Iraq in in September or October or November of this year just didn't happen. We didn't have the money, you know.
Right.
And it costs a lot more money to do work there than it does in Mexico. So as of right now, you know, we have 2 full-time correspondents. We've had 2 kind of part-time and temporary correspondents. One of our original full-time guys, Omar, is left for Syria. He's still going to be sort of coordinating things from Syria and working part-time until we're able to provide him a salary. And the way we are right now, we sort of said to him, look, I mean, I can only pay the people who are in Iraq. I'm not even paying myself.
Right.
And, you know, we just hired one of our part-time guys full-time, so we're going to have a Shia and a Sunni correspondent full-time.
Interesting.
So that's really going to expand the breadth of our coverage.
Yeah, no kidding.
You know.
So do they write all the material, and do they upload everything? They do everything themselves, or do they?
No, the way it works right now is they shoot everything,
mm-hmm.
and then we try to get them to sort of provide selects of the material they think is best, and they actually ship it to us by DHL.
Okay.
And then we have an editor here. Before it was me, and then it was another guy, and now Steve Wishwanek is doing pretty much all the editing. And we try to do it sort of in conjunction with the advice of the guys in Iraq. And ideally, you know, we'd have them doing everything. It would make things a lot easier. It's certainly much easier to translate a 3 to 8 minute video that's edited than it is to translate an hour of footage and then sort of figure out how the story is going to come together.
Absolutely.
You know, and so I mean, but because of electricity problems, because of security problems, because of everything on the ground there, it's just everybody sort of said, you know, including the Iraqis themselves, sort of said that it's best to have the editing done here. Now with Mexico, you know, we've got a power book that we're going to send down to them, hopefully next week or the week after, and then they're going to be doing most of the editing and uploading themselves. And if they can do the translation, that'll be great. Otherwise, you know, we'll translate the edited video into English and do the subtitling. So
what kind of feedback are you getting from Americans and also Iraqis, or even like some of the troops that are over there with Alive in Baghdad?
Well, we haven't gotten a lot of feedback from the troops, you know. In terms of Americans, I mean, it's pretty much all over the place, you know.
Mm-hmm.
There's definitely a lot of sycophants on sort of both sides, you know, anti-war people and pro-war people, and they don't really add much to the dialogue. They just kind of yell, and
right.
They either say, you know, you're a liar, and this is all bullshit and lies. You know, excuse me, I don't know if this is
That's fine.
a G-rated podcast.
No, it's okay.
You know, and then there's people who say, oh, well, this is why, you know, we should throw Bush in jail, or Bush is a baby killer, or things like that. And, you know, at Alive in Baghdad, we really try to sort of stay away from making any kind of political analysis on either end. And I mean, to some degree, that comes from my background, which is, you know, originally my background was in narrative film, and I've really always been enamored with French realism and this idea of just like putting a story out there, and you don't make a judgment, you just show it as it is and let the audience sort of decide what they will.
Right on.
And, you know, we feel like it's pretty obvious,
yeah,
you know, what you know, our stance on the war is.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I mean, we just think that war is a bad thing, and we think that it'd be better if people could sort of be figuring out their differences through relationships. And certainly, you know, a primary reason that we're running Alive in Baghdad and now Alive in Mexico is so that people can have a better understanding about each other, you know, around the world.
See, one of the ideas I got from Alive in Baghdad was trying to do something like this, but for down in Katrina or down in New Orleans.
Yep.
And have you heard of anyone trying to do that?
No, there was somebody who talked to me once from New Orleans about doing something like that,
mm-hmm.
but he never really followed up with me. And then, you know, I mean, my grandfather is from Kentucky, from Crab Orchard, Kentucky, and they just had, you know, they just got indoor plumbing like 10 years ago, like in 1995 or something. And I've been thinking a lot, you know, about maybe once we sort of get some of these overseas stuff, you know, together, that I might start like an Alive in Appalachia or something like this.
Oh, interesting.
You know, because I definitely feel like, you know, there's a lot that we can learn from people in the United States and from the sort of the folks that we never hear from. But I just felt like to start with, you know, there were a couple other places I wanted to go first and places I wanted to focus on.
Man,
you
so
know,
what actually... Oh, go ahead.
Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Yeah, well, I kind of hope that people are going to start coming to us and want to do these stories, and that we can figure out a way to to integrate with them and to sort of not necessarily franchise exactly, but to do something like that where we can teach people to do, what I've been doing and what we're doing, and then use that as a way to build our network, because we can only do so much. I mean,
Right.
with pretty much no money and with only a small volunteer staff, we can only expand so much and go to so many places. But if we had other people who were really dedicated to doing stories about different places that wanted to work with us and want to work under our model and things like that, I mean, that would be great.
See, that's the thing that confuses me, because HBO gave $2 million to Spike Lee to do When the Levees Broke, and that was an amazing documentary. But after you watch the 4 hours, you're just in shock, and you want to know what's going on with these people. Like, are they still being taken care of? What's FEMA doing? What's their education system going on? What's their welfare? How the levees being? Just there are all these questions after you watch it that you don't know, and no one's really covering that day to day. So that's why I say that's where something like that is very handy and comes in. And I would think someone would jump at it if they throw $2 million, but then again, that's a profit business. I mean, that's...
Right. Well, I think, to some degree, people didn't really know who we are,
Right.
We only just recently topped getting a regular viewership of 10,000, getting, our viewership of each video just recently topped 10,000 as like an average. Now our videos about Iraq are getting an average of, we could probably say, about 10,000 views, a little bit more, but if we want to talk about like a regular average, it's probably about 10,000.
Well, after this podcast is going to go up to 10,004.
All right.
No, I
but
get it.
So I mean, it's stuff like that, and people say, well, why don't you have money? Why aren't you funded? Why don't you have more people watching? And we don't really know. I mean, to some degree, I think that part of the problem is that people who are really involved with digital media and stuff sort of think that it's the be-all and end-all,
Right.
and don't realize that there's still there's still plenty of people who don't have broadband, who don't even think to watch video on the net, or when they think about watching video on the net, it's, some skateboard video on YouTube, or, a dude getting attacked by a cat or something like this.
Yeah, I mean, I work at a sales training firm, and they don't even know how to use their own email, so yeah.
Right, so there you go, and that's a degree to which, we should be advocating for getting, getting content more flexible and more, more access to standard television and to the same pipes and going to the same place. That's something that we have to advocate for. I mean, people, it's like you were mentioning New Orleans, right? I mean, it was a big deal. The news were all talking about that Louisiana was 75% without power, but nobody mentioned that there were parts of Louisiana that had just gotten phone service a few years before.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
So it changes the perspective on what does it mean that the state's 75% without power. I mean, how much of the state had power before the hurricane?
Exactly.
Yeah.
So with Live in Mexico, did you go down there and do some scouting? Is that...
Yeah, I was just there for a month.
Okay.
I just spent a month in Mexico. It was my first time in Mexico, and I went down to sort of try and figure out what was going on there and whether we could set up something similar and how we would do that.
And as soon as you got busted by the federales, did you realize right away that you have something that's worth doing?
Well, I mean, I think we realized before that, and it was kind of like, after that happened, we were sort of trying to figure out, well, how can we make sure that this still, is doable and it's going to be safe, and how we work it, how we make it work,
Well, safe is a key word, especially when one of your friends was shot and killed.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting because the situation in Oaxaca right now seems a little more calm,
Mm-hmm.
But we can't really be sure. I mean, there's a lot of people who are in hiding, a lot of people who have left town because they're being looked for, things like this. And so it's hard to say, like, what's really going on, we don't really know. I mean, certainly there hasn't been a lot of violence lately, and certainly there's been, the federal police have left Oaxaca, and, there's been changes, but we don't really know what they mean or what, kind of benchmarks they are.
So how are they keeping the peace in Oaxaca? I mean, if the police are gone, who's who's in control?
Right. Well, I mean, they've arrested a large number of the leadership and other folks in Oaxaca, and so because of that, I mean, a lot of people are underground, and because the federal police have left, and the municipal police are there, and they're, they're the same people that were involved in shooting Brad. And I have to remember that, like, when Brad was shot, there were 2 other Mexicans shot the same day, and they hardly ever get mentioned. Right. There were 2 other people killed in the same area that day.
So how did you feel when...
Can you hold on one
Sure,
second?
yeah, take your time.
Hey. Sorry.
Okay. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, I don't know where I was, or I think I was finished. So.
Okay, I have just a few more questions to ask.
Sure.
One is, how did you personally feel when, or could you tell me what happened when you were down in Oaxaca and they came and they, arrested you for apparently no reason?
It was really crazy. I mean, I've been arrested a few times before, and I mean, they didn't say. I mean, we were halfway through a pizza. You know what I mean? Like, we were sitting in Domino's. I mean, I was almost like more ashamed that I was in Domino's when I was arrested than in shock that I was being arrested.
Yeah.
But like, my buddy Jeff is a big fan of Domino's, and I've been known to eat a pizza, so we just went over there. I mean, it was his last day in Oaxaca. I mean, it was just like so strange. I mean, the whole thing, like, it started with some police were like standing outside the window of Domino's, like looking in, literally with the dude's hands around his eyes, like he was making binoculars. It was just like so absurd. And my first instinct was like, we need to go now. But at that point it was really too late. And then we kind of convinced ourselves that they were just looking at the menu across the window, across from them. That was, just happened to be across the table from us. And then 10 or 15 minutes later, 6 or a dozen guys came in and grabbed us, basically. Didn't say why we were being arrested, just said that, we needed to come with them, and sort of dragged us out of the pizza place and put us in the back of a truck and drove us off to the police station.
What were you thinking during that?
I mean, I didn't know. I was like, I don't know what's going on. They don't seem particularly angry, so I guess I'm not that worried right now. But nobody was telling us why we were being detained or what we had done. And, I think that we figured, since it was the police, since it was broad daylight, since we hadn't done anything really illegal, we've been really careful about that. Maybe it wasn't such a, we didn't need to be too worried.
Right.
And then, I mean, it took like probably 2.5 or 3 hours before anybody told us why we were there. We were interrogated at length, and then eventually told that we had been brought in because we were basically committing Oaxaca's version of disturbing the peace, that we were pushing people and taking their photos when they, even though they asked us not to, and then, saying very horrible words to them, and just like basically causing a nuisance, which is just absurd because, okay,
right.
If that's what happened, then why did you just interrogate me for 2 hours about, Radio Universidad, about APO, about certain leaders in APO, about what I was in Oaxaca for, all these sorts of things. And we literally laughed, when we heard the charge. Like, we literally laughed out loud. It was just like so absurd. And, the magistrate, I think, was barely able to sort of contain himself from kind of like smiling or acknowledging that it was really absurd.
Well, that's good to hear. I mean, take it a little bit lightly. They're like, all right, you're just busting. So how much you spend? Like, you said 300 pesos to get out?
Yeah, I think it was 300 pesos each. Yeah, I think it was 300 pesos each. So that's about $100 total. Mm-hmm. And then, we spent about $100 on the lawyer. And then, of course, the police confiscated our phones. We never got those back. So that's another however much, a couple $100.
Didn't they try to give back your phones?
Yeah, they had, they basically, we tried to get them back, and they said, well, they're locked up. You can't get them till tomorrow. Sorry, the director's gone home. There's nothing I can do. So we said, okay, well, that's fine. We'll go home and we'll come back tomorrow between 9 and 10 a.m. And, maybe an hour or two after we got back, to the hotel, we got a phone call from the lobby basically saying, hi, the police are here and they need you to come with them so you can go identify your phones. And we were like, well, that's weird. What's that about? And we noticed at the same time that there was, two large white pickup trucks outside outside the hotel on the other side of the street, parked sort of right one behind the other. And we were a little uncomfortable about that. And basically, it was like 8 o'clock at night, and we were tired, and
Yeah.
we weren't about to go down and deal with it if we could just do it in the morning. So, my partner who was on the phone with them just said, well, look, we said we'd come down between 9 and 10 in the morning tomorrow, and that's what they told us at the station, and that's what we're going to do. So then apparently they left, and shortly after the phone conversation, we noticed that the trucks had gone. We never saw who got in or out of the trucks. We know that they showed up right before and left right after this whole thing happened. We weren't able to talk to anybody, the person at the desk who had talked to the police to find out if it was a uniformed officer, an officer with a badge, someone just claiming they were with the police. I mean, who knows,
Well,
Then, but maybe half an hour later, we decided to call the lawyer and mention it to him, and he said, well, I'm still in the area, so why don't we just go over and see about this and see if we can get the phones. So Aowen and Jeff went back down, and they went and talked to the guy, and the guy at the station was like, why are you here? I told you yesterday, or I told you earlier today, the phones are locked up, the director's gone home, the mayor's gone home, all the ranking officers have all gone home. There's nobody here who could possibly give me the authority to unlock your phones and get them for you. And then we said, well, the police came to the hotel and said, we need you to come identify the phones. At which point he said something to the effect of, well, that's just absurd, that's crazy talk. There's nobody who went from the police station to your hotel. I don't know what you're talking about. As I told you before, the director went home. He's not going to be back till 9 a.m. tomorrow. You can get your phones then if you'd like.
is that when you said, okay, we need to get out of here for a sec and, figure out what we need to do?
I mean, that was basically, when they came back and they told me that, I was like, oh my God,
Somebody's got our
we
number.
left. I mean, basically we stayed in town long enough to take Jeff to the airport the next morning, and then we got the hell out of Dodge. We were gone for, I guess, maybe 6 or 9 days before we ended up going back to Oaxaca a couple of days before I left, because my flight was out of Oaxaca.
Now,
So we had to go back,
one thing, I'm sorry I didn't do any research, but what is your ethnicity?
Oh, I'm Irish and Italian.
All right, so you're white.
Well, technically.
Yeah,
but,
I'm white too.
Like in the Middle East, everybody thinks I'm an Arab.
Okay.
I mean,
I'm
I'm a slightly darker Italian.
Okay.
I get pale, but I'm known to get a tan.
Well, that's helpful.
They
especially...
thought I was Latin. To some degree, some people in the South thought that I was. I mean, I have a lot of facial hair because I have kind of a beard right now. That's not really
white
common.
America.
So it's not common America, but it's also
Right.
not common Mexican, and so I think that certainly, prevented people from mistaking me for being Mexican.
Okay. Because, I mean, that helps to blend in those kind of atmospheres. If it was my big ass,
Sure.
I'd stick out like a sore thumb big time. But it helps to, be able to blend in and to do your work. And especially
Right.
when you empower people, that's what your real goal is, I feel, with what you're doing, is because you can go anywhere and just show people how and what to do in order to make this happen. Is that what your goal is?
Yeah, I mean, I don't feel that I can tell those stories. I think that the people in Iraq are much better suited to tell the stories of Iraq than I am. People in Mexico are much better. I mean, how am I gonna? I mean, I spent a year researching about Iraq, to reading the history and learning about the culture, and I know who very obscure figures from 700 years ago in Iraqi history are, that everybody in Iraq knows who is.
Right.
And now if I'm supposed to do the same thing in Mexico, if I'm going to do the same thing, before we start projects in Africa or before I go to Chechnya, it's like, well, then I'm going to have a year or more turnaround every time I want to start a new bureau.
Right.
It's just not going to be possible. It's the sort of thing that I have to do to the degree that I can. You know what I mean? I have to sort of try to do these sorts of things. And really, I mean, I think part of the thing that we're doing is that we make a real effort to learn about the culture of people where we're going and to learn their history and out of respect and out of necessity.
Well, I think you do a good job of that.
But certainly they're better positioned.
Well, and you also, I mean, like I was saying earlier in Alive in Baghdad, it seems very homegrown. Like, it doesn't seem like it's your voice telling us what's going on over there. It seems like they're expressing what they're going through. For instance, like the cemetery, and also when the when they're in the hospital with the wounds.
Yep.
It felt very intimate. You know, they're just talking about what's going on and how they're dealing with it, and it's terrible to see because they're just like, you know, it's life. We have to live
Right.
this way, and it doesn't seem like anyone's screaming or crying, you know, yelling, going, get out, get out. They're just telling you what they're dealing with day to day, and I think it's very powerful.
Well, that's what we strive for. You know, we found that I try to give you know, suggestions for questions and things like that to the guys in Iraq and to stories and things. But the best stories have been stuff that they came up with, pretty much. You know, that's definitely things that like I never, you know, would have thought of. We had a video of the Night Watchman. You know, I never even would have asked about that. And we'd heard about that sort of anecdotally in the news in some places, but we hadn't seen a lot of it.
Mm-hmm.
In, you know, really, and we never seen it on the video. We're never going to see it on CNN because they're not going to have the. I mean, you will see it on CNN because you saw it when they interviewed me.
Right.
You know, and they showed our footage. But they're just not. It's not something they're not capable of. And I think that it's because of their outlook, and it's because of, you know, what they're trying to do and their, you know, willingness for risk and all these things. I mean, but you know, it's certainly not money, because if we're talking about budget, we probably spend less than CNN's petty cash fund every month
easily
for their work in Baghdad, you know.
And so that's actually, I'm glad you mentioned that, because you guys are very transparent with your funding and where all the money is coming from, and I think that's just so important for people to realize, you know, how you are being funded and how much money you have left in there.
Right.
Now, how did you come up with that idea of doing that?
Well, some people who've been involved with PodCamp and with a couple of these other sort of open source like technology media projects, you know, they sort of said, look, you know, we think that probably you'd be really well served if you were using a wiki and sort of demonstrating to people how much funds you had and where it was going, so then they'll feel like, because you know, we want it to be the community and the people who are watching the shows to be funding the project.
Mm-hmm.
And so because of that, you know, they sort of said, well, look, if people can see where it's going, they're going to be more likely to fund it, and they can see how much you have, and they'll be feeling more connected and plugged in to what you're doing. You know, so that's where we came from for that, you know. And we go back and forth because, you know, it doesn't really say anywhere that if you donate to the site that we're going to post your name somewhere. So,
right.
You know, and we thought maybe we shouldn't be posting people's names, or we should email them and ask them if they want their name to be posted. You know, things like that. But it's a good position to be in. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I don't think actually. You know, we've also gone back and forth about, you know, how transparent we should be about our funds and things like that. Whether this is a good thing for us or a bad thing for us. As of right now, I don't think it's actually super transparent, because you have to know what a wiki is, and you have to like actually click on that, and then
right.
You know, we don't say go here to find out how much money we actually have in the bank and see why we need you to fund us. And we kind of feel like we're in this sort of catch-22 where we have to produce high-quality content to have viewers and have people take us seriously and have people to watch us. But the higher quality and more interesting content and stories we produce, the less likely people are to recognize that we desperately need funds. You know, the less likely they are to realize that, like, I haven't had a job for a year, you know,
Yeah.
and that, like, the guy who's doing our editing is working a job part-time because he was lucky enough to find a job that would pay just almost slightly more than the amount he needs to be able to pay his rent and pay his bills, you know, and he's passionate about doing this. And then so far, we've been able to come up with the money to pay the guys in Iraq each month, and, you know, and to pay now to hire a couple of people in Mexico. But that money's going to run out, you know, next month,
right?
Pretty much, and it's been like that constantly. It's been month to month, and we've had people come forward, you know, to say, hey, you know, we're interested in investing in the project, or we're interested in this, or we're interested in that, or, you know, we don't know how much we can give, but we'd like to keep the project still going. But some of these conversations are a couple months old, and nothing's ever materialized.
Gotcha.
You know, and so we're looking at, I mean, we're talking with Current TV right now. We've got a contract that hopefully we pretty much just finalized. I've got to print out the forms and sign them, and hopefully I can get it, you know, in the money coming to for the bank account before Christmas, or at least, right after the first of the year.
That's good. So Current signed on for Alive in Baghdad or Alive in Mexico?
Alive in Baghdad.
Okay, good.
And I mean, they're not paying great money, but I mean, if they take the first 16 minutes of footage they license and then they take the option, that'll be a good amount.
Yeah.
But I mean, our costs right now, if we're just talking about just monthly payments minimum, is close to $2,000 a month right now.
Wow.
And that's nothing, but it's not nothing. You know what I mean?
No, I know, because I mean, how are you living? That's my question. Where's your money coming in for you to do?
Well, I mean, I was lucky because I had a good job for before I started this, and I was able to raise money.
That's
and then
good.
I was on unemployment, for about a year, and and as I was just about to remind you, but I was reminded before I could say that my partner was a doctor, and so she's been keeping the largest part of that. And I mean, my unemployment went up in September, so she's really been keeping things going since then, paying our rent.
Man, thank you so much for taking some time and talking with me.
Sure.
I'd like to thank Brian Conley again for taking time and speaking with me. And I'd like to thank all my listeners and people that encourage me to keep doing this. And I'm really enjoying the hell out of this, guys. So if anybody has any ideas or people you'd like me to talk to, please email me at andy@fcproducer.com and let me know. And I'll be glad to start up a conversation. But one thing, I hope everybody has a great holiday season. Merry Christmas to all. Happy Hanukkah, Kwanzaa, and anything else Festivus. But I'd like to thank all the people who gave me the opportunity to interview you. And, I'm not making any money off this. It's just fun. I'm having a great time doing this, picking the brains of some really intelligent and creative people. And I want to just give a roll call. Sarah Phelps, who's a producer and manager of Pez Films, a brilliant stop-motion animation filmmaker, and I'm sure he has some other skills that just have not been explored yet. Blake Fawcett, the creator of Series DVD, for his independent mastery of being who he is. He's just a remarkable independent filmmaker, music videos, DVDs. He puts it all together, and he's local in Greensboro, North Carolina, too. Deborah Scranton, the director of the War Tapes, she was an awesome conversation with her as she opened up and told me about her experience with the War Tapes. Conversation I had with Craig Aaron, the communications director of freepress.net. He opened up and just gave me all the information that I needed to know about net neutrality. He's just such a great source of information, and he's really pushing us to do something about it. Conversation with Micah Moore, the independent filmmaker from Greensboro, North Carolina. What can I say? This guy is brilliant. He's talented across all fields: art, filmmaking, acting, producing, animation, you name it. He's done it. And he's looking for investors to invest in his future. His current film, Chinatown Dick, looks brilliant. It looks like a masterpiece waiting to be bought. So if you got some extra money, throw it Micah's way. He'll make a winner out of you, no doubt about it. Thank you also to Brett Ingram, who's an award-winning documentary filmmaker from Greensboro, North Carolina. His brilliant portrayal of Bruce Bickford, who is a claymation animator, which was a remarkable documentary. And it was just really good to talk to him about his upbringing and what steps he went through to get where he's at right now. Sergeant Zach Bazzi from the War Tapes. He was one of the soldiers who carried a camera around in Iraq. And we really got to understand why he loves being a soldier and what he's doing in his life. And Bruce Iglauer, the CEO, founder of Alligator Records. We talked about his relationship with Sun Seals, the legendary blues artist who passed away 2 years ago. And it was just a very intimate conversation. He really did open up and just let everyone know who Sun Seals really was, the good and the bad. It was awesome. And finally, also, thank you to Brian Conley to talk about Alive in Baghdad. That concept, Alive in Baghdad, is something I feel that I could do something with. I don't know if I'm going to be doing another documentary. I might be doing something like that, similar to that. But definitely, he's an inspiration to me, and his work is great. And hopefully everybody gives him just a little bit during Christmas break. I'm not asking you to, but it'd be nice. So thanks for listening to this episode of Talent Freaks. Brian's dedication to participatory media highlights the power of storytelling and fostering social change. His efforts in training and equipping communities to share their narratives have contributed to a more diverse and representative media landscape. You can follow Brian Conley on X or Twitter, whatever you want to call that platform these days. He's Baghdad Brian, and you can find him. He's very active on there. And I'll have a link to his Twitter account in the description. And if you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to subscribe and rate the podcast. It truly helps others to discover these incredible stories. And if you want to know what I'm up to, check out talentfreaks.com, where you'll see some of the videos that I've worked on over the years, as well as the photography that I'm starting to produce and shoot. Until next time, keep exploring, keep creating, and stay curious.